Hello and welcome to the show. So everybody knows in the last couple of weeks I've been dealing with issues at hand, social problems, social constructionism, issues that people want to talk about because they affect society and they affect individuals. And so I decided that Fiona is going to be my guest today. Fiona Mckosh is a recovering addict, if I can put it that way, and we're going to talk about that. But the interesting thing is, unlike the other addicts that was on the show before, Fiona has taken her story and decided to turn that into something positive, effecting change in society, and I just love that. Fiona, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So it's been a long journey, and I know that looking at your calendar and the concept of sober and sexy, when I saw this first, I must be honest, I thought it was something very strange that Patrick was talking about. And my mind wasn't that open to understanding what was going on. However, when he decided to explain to me what this was really about, I thought that there was a part of me that felt that this story must be told. And that's what we're doing today. Sober and sexy. What's it all about?
Well, as you said, it has been a long journey. I'm a recovering addict. I've been clean just over 5 years. And my main passion with Sober and Sexy and the mission is to look at the positives around recovery, and let's look at the solution rather than get stuck in the problem. I think most people are aware of the horrors of active addiction, but I want to express the joys of recovery, the beauty of recovery, and the second chances that we get, rather than getting stuck in the darker side.
Society normally has a very specific behavior, and that is they like dealing with the problem in the past.
Yes.
And your product deals with the future and the solution. So it's the future and solution. So that's where we come from. But I know we're talking about the calendar here, and we're talking about a concept around the calendar and selling your story and your narrative through the calendar itself by incorporating the stories of other people in a calendar called Sober and Sexy. But we're going to get to all of that. For the purpose of our viewers, we want to understand you as Fiona, as the driving force behind this particular product, and understand your story so that we can see the motivation through that.
Right, well, I guess I have always displayed addictive behaviors from when I was very young, and I always felt very isolated and I didn't fit in. I was homeschooled till I was 8, and then I found it difficult to make friends with kids my own age. And typically what happens with myself and with other addicts is at the point of adolescence and you start experimenting with drink and drugs, and then the wheels can come off, and that certainly happened with me.
Once you're into that vicious cycle, it remains a cycle. It just keeps on spiraling.
It spirals. It's a progressive disease. So while I didn't pick up drink or drugs initially and say, great, I'm going to become an addict and alcoholic, and I didn't use as heavily as I was towards the end, but from the start I was using and drinking quite substantially more than most people around me. When I first got drunk, I gave myself alcoholic poisoning. I don't have an off switch, so give me a substance and I will use or drink it till oblivion. I have a difficulty dealing with life on life's terms and dealing with my reality. And when I first started drinking, that became before the drugs. I thought, well, this is my solution. I feel uncomfortable in my own skin, I don't fit in, and then the drink took all of that away, and I felt part of, and I felt confident. But over the years, it became the problem.
Fiona, you make reference to the personification of yourself and use the word I. It's interesting that you do, because that's your journey. But that I are many eyes around the world. There are many people in the position that you are and you were, and there are many people that are looking to augment the way that they come out of those things, or look at life in a different way perhaps. What was that moment for you? What made you decide to come out of the problem, and once you came out, to then turn that into something rather positive?
It's not like I had one moment where I'd had enough and I needed a change of life. The last few years of active addiction were absolutely horrendous. But even when I had an intervention by my family and
I want to stop you for a moment before we continue. You say horrendous.
Yeah.
Now, many of our viewers are sitting back and their perceptions of horrendous might be different, depend on their life experiences. And then there might be people watching the show that are in exactly the same boat that you were in the past, and they might relate to what you're referring to. And then there might be people contemplating, or rather not fully contemplating, but perhaps on the outskirts of slipping into that vicious cycle. So let's talk to those people. You speak about horrendous. What do you define that as, especially within this context?
Well, towards the end, I barely left the house. I was in a state of permanent terror and paranoia. I couldn't get more than 2 hours sleep at a time because I would wake up going into withdrawal, and then so I had to take another hit. I couldn't hold down a job. I was on the verge of bankruptcy. I didn't wash. I didn't get out of my pajamas. Yeah, it was very, very, very dark.
So the quality of life was absolutely
shocking. And I couldn't see a way out. I thought this was it. I thought I was absolutely doomed and I was going to die that way. I couldn't envisage putting down the drink and drugs. I couldn't see a way of living without it, but it was killing me at the same time.
Was a part of you crying out that you want to come out of this?
Yeah, but I mean, what I wanted to do and what I thought I was going to rehab for 28 days was to have a little bit of a break, clean myself up, and then I would learn how to use successfully and moderate.
That's an interesting one. That's very interesting.
Which generally speaking, if you're an addict, there's no such thing as moderation. You have to. I follow an abstinence-based program that I'm nothing.
Of course.
Yeah.
So all of that happens, and you decide it's somewhere down the line you're going to take a massive gap and a massive jump to really get out of the entire spiral, and there's no moderation, which I think some people do learn down the line that the word doesn't exist. And when that happens, you decide it's time to get out. And you get out of that. Tell us a bit about that process. You come all the way from the UK to South Africa. And there are people in South Africa and people that we deal with that say that I need to go abroad to solve this problem. Is this a matter of locality? Is it service?
I don't think it really matters where you go. I mean, the reason that I came to rehab here was cost. It's very, very expensive in the UK. But it's really what the turning point for me was when I completely and fully surrendered. I actually relapsed after 5 months of treatment because I wasn't prepared to put down the red wine. For me, it was a food group. You've got to be kidding me. I knew I had a problem with drugs, but not the red wine. So, the rehab that time round didn't work because I wasn't prepared to fully surrender to being abstinent and that I couldn't moderate. So I spent 4 months researching why I had to put down the red wine, and then after I did have a epiphany, aha moment when I said, I can't do this. I know I have to put it all down, and I put myself back into rehab. And I haven't looked back. So it's really up to the individual to get to that point of fully surrendering that they're powerless and that they need help.
So it's been 6 years?
5 years, because I came here for rehab and I relapsed and then I put myself back into treatment. So I'm just over 5 years clean.
So tell us about the last 3 years, perhaps. How's life been? Do you wake up differently every morning, seeing the sunshine?
Yeah, I mean, typically all my life, I've woken up with a sense of dread and wanted to go back to sleep. I used to hide in sleep, even when I was little. Now I actually get straight up and I can face the day. I mean, it's not easy. I suffer from depression and anxiety. Life isn't a bed of roses, but the fact that I'm still alive, I was actually given 6 months to live. I shouldn't be alive. So I do have a sense that I want to make the most of every day. And it's often not easy, but it's just because I'm clean doesn't make life
different?
Yes.
Different through a certain lens, of course.
Yes.
So, Fiona, what's interesting is that listening to your story, Now, many people would reach a certain point in their life and they either decide that they're going to go this way or that way, or they're going to remain on that path until they hit or somewhere where it ends. Like you said, that there was a time that you thought that you have 6 months left.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose you had to continue. That 6 months would have elapsed. You might have not been sitting here today.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. But you decided to take a different route altogether, and that is to use your experience as a base of inspiration to other people, and to talk about the very aspects of rehabilitation and going forward. Tell us a bit about that component and how that then turned or rather evolved into the calendar itself, which I find rather interesting. Because many people will say, let me develop a book, or let me go onto a TV show and talk about my path, my journey. And other people will say, let me visit schools and talk about my journey. But it's the first time I see a calendar talking about that journey. So I think it's exciting.
Yes, it's interesting how it evolved. In early recovery, I did an exhibition. I'm a photographer. And I called on my friends in the recovery community, and I wanted to take pictures of them looking happy and healthy, because if you go and Google images of addicts or even recovering addicts, they all look like they're still using. So I wanted to portray addicts in a more positive light, and it was done with a very amateur camera, and it was very small scale, and but it was well received. People really liked the angle of portraying addicts in a more recovering addicts in a more positive light, and it also frustrates me that I think there's a lot of mystery shrouding 12-step fellowships and how recovering addicts, because there's still a lot of stigma and shame to being an addict, and this is one thing I'm passionate about, breaking down the walls of stigma and shame.
Are you saying that you've embraced those shadows and you're able to come out and say, this is what I've and this is where I've been, and because if we don't do that, we might be creating our own boundaries going forward. So looking at the actual calendar, what do we expect to see? I know that there are hidden subtleties inside the calendar itself. So we look at a particular picture of somebody that's a recovering addict, and they look, and you portray them in a certain way. Is it really about the picture itself, or is it about the story behind that picture?
I think it can be both. I'm a very visual person, so my message is very quite obvious when you look at an image of someone who's semi-nude. By the way, the idea came from the film Calendar Girls. I'm not
going to say what I remember from my youth and what I don't.
But the film based women from the WI in the UK decided to strip for a calendar, tastefully done, to raise money for a charity. And so I was talking to a few friends, and I was thinking, I was saying I want to do another exhibition of recovering addicts. And somehow, I can't remember exactly, but the conversation came, well, why don't you do something around based on this idea? And that's how it kind of snowballed. I wanted to choose people who had a strong recovery, and I know all of the models personally, so visually I wanted them to be very striking. I wanted to have poses that were very strong, but I think there's a vulnerability coming through by the fact that they're naked, but also I think addicts anyway still have this inner strength, that we've come through hell, we've survived and come out the other side. So because I've worked with the models, that's what I see. I don't know maybe if it's instantly noticeable, but then there's a bio on each page giving a backstory of where they've been, and then focusing on how their life has
do you believe that the acceptance by the public of the calendar itself is one way forward, or one step forward to the acceptance of addicts, or rather recovering addicts in general?
So. Yeah, I mean the wanting to expose addiction as and that people in recovery, we're not bad people. We have an illness, we have a disease, we can turn our life around. Look, we have nothing to hide, literally nothing to hide, and that's the metaphor behind the nakedness.
Of course. So you meet Patrick Kadalie,
Yes.
who I also know, and he comes to me and he says, and he talks about all these buzzing ideas, and he's generally that way.
Yeah.
So what role does he play, and how did that fusion happen?
Well, last year I was able to fund the printing myself of the calendar, and I recouped that through sales, but this year I wasn't able to. And so I went on a fundraising drive, and I managed to raise a substantial amount for all the printing costs. And one of my fundraising drives was going to a church in Rondebosch, where I've been a few times, and I was allowed to speak to the congregation. And I went with Ashley from the Cape Town Drug Counselling Centre, where the money is being donated to. And I spoke a bit about the calendar and what we're hoping to achieve, and if anyone's able to donate. And then afterwards, this woman came up to me, Rhoda, and said, this is great, I'd really love you to come in and chat to me and my brother and see if we can do anything together. And I went in the Tuesday after, and that's how I met Patrick. And then we have now registered Sober and Sexy as a company.
So Sober and Sexy now goes to another level.
Yes, it does.
And that's something that I want to talk about. I also do know that you have an event coming up later this week. I'm going to talk to Patrick about that.
Yep.
Fiona, thank you for coming into the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Just after the break, I'm going to talk to Patrick Kadalie, and he's going to tell us where he thinks the calendar is going to be going next.